For years, you didn't want to talk about it. You were very anti Hell in a Cell. You didn't want to embrace it. I mean, now you embrace it. You're cool with it. But why were you not okay with it? Why did you not want to talk about it? And what changed your mind?
It was like overtook my life, you know? There were so many things I was proud of and wanted to talk about, and yet it was the only thing people wanted to talk to me about. So it got to the point where I was like Bill Murray in an airing of Groundhog's Day that never, ever ended. Like one day was like the one before, and it went on for 18 years. Like I would go up and every day, like someone, hey, did it hurt? And I knew it, and there was only so many ways you could answer that question, especially in the days when WWE never puts their superstars, or Al Snow, in a position where they'll never be anything but a full line. 2-hour appearances, there's never a moment for someone to take a lonely Virgil photo, where there's not a fan within 200 yards, even though we've all been there. If you do conventions, there comes a time and place where no one's in your line. But they definitely they want that constant flow. Remind me what I was talking about again. Sorry, the second time.
You're not embracing Hell in a Cell.
Yeah.
He fell off a cell. Everybody, give the guy a break.
I've loved this tour. I have, but it hasn't offered much of the chance of sleep. Right? He dropped me off yesterday, and he comes back with some bad news. We're getting to the hotel at 1 o'clock. I was like, what is it? He goes, I'm afraid I have some bad news. What is it? He goes, wake up call, 7 a.m. And I was notoriously, even today I was talking about my Achilles heel being I could never sleep before an early wake up. So you're catching me with like an hour and a half of sleep. So I'm losing my train of thought. But even when you're doing those 2-hour constant appearances, you're seeing sometimes 700 people in 2 hours. And there's only so many ways you can answer a question you've been asked about so many times. And it was like you're on auto reply, like, oh, wouldn't want to go through another like that. Ooh, it was a tough day at work. And there was just nothing I thought was original about it anymore. One guy waited, he was in Kansas City. We're going to do a Q&A here in a little bit. And I could see he was kind of a tough cowboy, but he didn't ask a question during the Q&A. He just kind of kept eyeballing me like this. And he waited until afterward, during the meet and greet. He comes up to me, he goes, hey, I noticed when the Undertaker threw you off that cell. By the way, in no way, shape, or form did he toss me off that cell. As we know, it means something different over here, and no one wants to think of the Undertaker that way. I was asked on live television, the Undertaker tossed you off that cell, and I said, no, he threw me. That means something different over in the UK. And Brian Kendrick laughed. He was the only one who got the reference, but right? So he just tossed him up. No, he threw me. So this guy said, I noticed when the Undertaker threw you off that cell that you landed on a table. Then he looks to me and he almost whispers in my ear to preserve my reputation as some kind of tough guy. He goes, it broke your fall, didn't it? I said, yeah, it did. He goes, so you didn't get hurt? And I went, not at all. And I looked at him and I said, it was a magic table. Well, that's the way I felt for the longest time. It really would get to the point where, I would count on my my media calls, like with radio station. They were my wake-up calls. So they'd get me, no sleep at all, or waking up. And there were times I'd actually yell at people and go, I've been involved in some matches where I wasn't knocked out, right into my teeth and stuck in my nose. Maybe you'd like to ask me about one of those. But no one really wanted to, Over time, people started talking about the title win against The Rock and the Rock and Sock connection, but for a long time, that's the only thing people wanted to talk about. And then there were 3, and this is something I touched on in the 20 Years of Hell, but I think it's really primary to the journey, and I think it bears revisiting. There were 3 specific instances that helped bring it around to me, bring some closure, and more than that, remind me of how fortunate I was to have been involved in something that people remember so fondly. You can't really appreciate that when you're 1 year out or 2 years out or 3 years out. But when you've been gone, when you've been gone from the wrestling business full time, for 19 years, and you're still allowed to show up in public in sweatpants, no socks, and a pajama top. And you're allowed to do it primarily because you created an impression on people with something you did 21 years ago. You realize it's not a burden, but a blessing. And so I appreciate each and every one of you who come up here and come out here. And any question you want is a good question as far as I'm concerned. So we'll revisit those instances. Yeah, thank you very much. One by one. So just, the first one was that about 6-7 years ago, my wife is waiting for me when I get home for a road trip. And she said, the kids want to watch the match. It's Mickey and Huey, my youngest kids. And I was like, man, how do they even know about that match? And like, people have been talking about it in school. And I said, you think they're ready for that? And she goes, I think we better watch it. So we waited for him to come home. It was probably the first time in 10 years I'd actually watched the match. I'd seen the clips, JR's call had become so iconic, it had become part of popular culture to the point where like there'd be a football game going on, it'd be like 5-0, and all of a sudden all these memes would pop up. Would somebody stop the damn match, Like JR and I are inextricably entwined because of that one moment in time. Now I appreciate it. Then I couldn't. So we're waiting for the kids. They come home and we put on that match. And if you haven't seen it in its entirety in a while, revisit it. It's freaking powerful. Like, it is an emotional roller coaster. It's like incredible moments happening in real time. And my takeaway from that was, God, like, look at the lengths that we were willing to go to bring that match over the finish line. Maybe it wasn't the way we'd intended, but there was never a moment, where, maybe momentarily, Undertaker told me, I asked him today for the first time, what was it that allowed me to convince you that I could continue? Because we're assuming a lot of people are familiar with the match, right? Like, I go off the cell, and that was a thing of beauty, right? We should have realized that something was up. If you watch that video, our feet sink through that mesh, like boom, like right away, first or second step. I'd studied the match he had with Shawn Michaels. That was the first ever Hell in a Cell match. And it's funny how you remember specific things. To me, I specifically remember thinking to myself, like, I don't remember any twist ties in that match with Shawn Michaels. But they were actually shooting off the structure. And Undertaker, when I saw him 2 nights ago, he said he remembers hearing them as you're going bing, doom, like shooting off, right? And now I try to suplex the Undertaker, right? Go back and watch that match and watch us. He shuts that down in a hurry. Suplexing him on this dilapidated, this thing is falling apart, And all because choke slam happens. We talked about it today after the show. Were you there when we were saying, I said, man, as little athletic ability as I had, like, I always got a certain amount of lift, and so that any photo that you would see or any video always showed my butt about shoulder high, every single time I went up for that choke slam, every single time except that one night. Taker mentioned to me that he couldn't get the push because of the fact that we were likely to sink down and go through that thing together. And he was also concentrating on getting his feet off the mesh and onto the cross beams for support. And man, I went through that thing like a hot knife through butter. The last thing I said to The Undertaker, and this is something people may or may not know, it's not something I talked about in the special, the bump that I sold Mr. McMahon on, and the reason I wanted to start the match on top of the cell, the big spectacular visual I had come up with was that when The Undertaker chokeslammed me, a little tear and a quarter was going to emerge, all right? And that ultimately he would stuff me upside down like I was going down a rabbit hole. And I was selling it, I was saying, like, if you hold me by the knees, like, I'll be flailing about. At a certain point, you let me go, I'll take my own bump, my hands and knees. Moderately dangerous, yeah, like a 12-foot drop, but nothing outrageous. It took a lot of convincing. Every single day I would tell the Taker I wanted to start that match on top of the cell. And every single day he would tell me that wasn't happening. And then finally, like before we took our break to go, a couple days off, I asked him one more time. He just looked at me and he goes, Jack, why are you so intent on killing yourself? And like I had all this emotion, and I told him, because you and I, we got this legacy, we got this history, like we don't even have an angle going into this match. I can't do what Sean did. I can't live up to what you guys did. I can't live up to what we've done before. I said, but if we can start the match in a way that nobody's ever done before, come up with things no one's ever seen before. And then I talked about the importance, like what if there's that element of magic in the air? And I swear to you, that's the one thing I think that's sometimes missing from today's product, is like guys are so intent on putting stuff together that they don't let the great moments breathe, and you can't script it, you can't predict it. It's either there or it's not. And I was like, if we have that in the air, we can create something no one's ever done before, do things no one's ever thought of before, like maybe we can make people think we're having a great match, even if we're not. And he said he'll think about it. And then I sold him on the idea. That was the big bump, choke slam. Tears a little bit of the mesh away. He's going to stuff me down that hole. So the last thing I said to the Undertaker before my music hit was, it may take 5 or 6 choke slams before that mesh starts to give. And by God, it didn't turn out that way, right? So I joked like, this is legit. Like after I get thrown off that massive structure, we got all these surreal instances taking place, The cell actually starts rising towards the heavens so they can put the gurney to carry me out of there. And the only people who know we may have something up our sleeve, we may, I say may because I didn't know if I could get up after that, but I told Undertaker, I told Mr. McMahon, I said, if I've got the strength, I'm going to roll off that gurney. I'm going to start climbing that son of a bitch again. And I go back, I get in goosebumps now talking about it. When you guys show it, there's that one thing. I get off that gurney, and I start climbing up that cell, and man, the energy in Pittsburgh was so alive. I said, if you could have bottled it at the source, you could have lit up that city for a week. And then you see Undertaker's face, and he just looks up, and people realize they're going up again. Like, they're going up again. And the one thing I wish I could have done was exchange with the Undertaker. I just didn't have it in me. And again, I wish I could have gotten up in the air, but if I had, this is something he and I talked about. It's like, man, if I'd gone up in the air for that choke slam, when I went through, it wasn't any rabbit hole. It was just me going right through like a hot knife through butter. I would have landed high on my neck or maybe on my head. I honestly don't think I ever would have wrestled again, But as it turned out, it wasn't particularly a great situation. There's actually twist ties laying on the ground with me. And, this is where, I think the fortitude of wrestlers comes through and the willingness to do whatever it takes. Because now if something like that were to happen, we would stop a match immediately, right? Learned a lot about head injuries. But at that time, in 1998, we didn't stop matches. We bought time. And that's when that ring filled up with people. Terry Funk was the first person in there. And I went home. I wrestled the next night after the cell, a very brief match. Mr. McMahon sent me home for 4 days where I tried to put the pieces of that match together in my mind because I remembered almost nothing. And I remember seeing it like 100 different times. I'm watching over and over, and I know on some level there are words exchanged between The Undertaker and Terry Funk, but they're just said so casually that I don't put any mind into trying to imagine the words that could have been spoken. And it was like, then Terry leans over, he like touches my face, it looks kind of awkward. He turns back to The Undertaker, he says something else, and at that point, The Undertaker chokeslammed Terry Funk, and in the process, Terry's shoes came off his feet. And I have no idea any of this has transpired as I've been unconscious for like 42 seconds. So that when I finally did roll over onto my stomach, like I look up, the only thing I could think of was, where did those shoes come from? Look at those shoes. And then the Undertaker, you see me, like you go through replays, and when you come back, I'm standing, right? And Jim Ross makes a call. He goes, he's got to be the toughest son of a bitch I've ever seen in this environment. Ooh. As he realized in the moment that I was stealing Stone Cold's gimmick or that maybe I was living Stone Cold's gimmick, and he had to qualify it. And I'm like, what type of environment are you talking about? Like, I'm the toughest son of a bitch you've ever seen in this environment? Made me a little bit angry. You know, that was the primary cause. Like, I had to have that seed in my mind. That's what I used when I turned on Steve Austin, was the idea that in some small way, don't tell him this because he'll get hot about it. Because, you know, guys have great pride. I thought that Jim Ross was qualifying what he said at my expense. Jim had the two best calls I'd ever heard, but in that case, in this environment, still had an issue with it. You know, still have a little issue with it. But it was then, when he said that, Undertaker then hits me, and my body, you probably saw it on the thing, my body just folded, right? And he realized this is a lost cause. And he had, remember that mane of dark red hair, and he just, like, he leaned over, and I'll never forget as long as I live what he said. He just leaned over and he said, hey there, fella. Are you okay, pal? That looked like a humdinger of a landing. No, he doesn't sound like that. He said, he just said, go home. And I'll never know what it was. It seemed like a pretty logical request, right? Any other night, the entirety of my career, I probably would have been, okay, go home. And that one night, it's crazy to sound like there was something out there, like bigger than the both of us, almost like mystical, that made me think for that one night that I was tougher and stronger and braver than I'd ever been before, and I know for a fact tougher and stronger and braver than I'd ever be again. I asked him tonight for the first time, I said, what did I say when you told me to go home? And he said, you went, no. I just kept saying no. And even when we came to the finish, you know, we go up and he's going to lift me. And I go, no, one more. I told him one more spot. And that's where I took the choke slam. He dropped me backwards on the tacks, and like that wasn't enough. One more spot. I took the choke slam. Ad-libbed. And man, you know, he folded them. My arms. I went up for that tombstone, and I'm not kidding you when I say, like, if I lost 98 matches, 96 of them, all except the casket matches. So maybe 90 of them. I probably lost 10 casket matches. Yeah, we have casket matches for you non-wrestling fans, and matches where we buried each other alive, right? He picked me up like I was a child. You know, he used to pick up Vader for the tombstone, upside down. And that night, just like every other night, actively saying my prayers. Because one wrong move in that situation, your life can change in a hurry. And that night, like every other night, he took perfect care of me, folded my arms over my chest. If you look, I just kick out at the very last second to show that there was a little bit of fight. Mrs. Foley's little boy, and JR said something like, I think this is the most ungodly thing we will ever witness. They gave of you their hearts. They gave you their minds. We will never forget what took place. And I know I'm rambling a lot here.
No,
but,
I thought a good comparison maybe to bring in right now was the wrestler Sin Cara got a staved finger, and he stopped wrestling.
What kind of finger?
Staved, like a stave. What do you stave? Like what do you?
I don't know.
What's a staved finger mean in American? Does anybody know it?
Broken? Dislocated?
Like dislocated.
Yeah, that hurts.
Bruised, dislocated finger.
Yeah.
This man fell off a cell twice and became a #1 New York Times best-selling author.
As long as I know this is why we're here, right? Tales from Hell, and I'm trying not to dip too deep into, you know, some stuff that I've never said before. Like I told you, I never knew what I had said, how convinced him that I was capable of continuing. And it was like that was first life experience with my kids showing up. And then the Undertaker and his wife surprised me in Austin, Texas at one of my events. And people would be like, haven't you known this guy since 1990? Can't you text message him? I'm like, no. I don't text message him. He doesn't send me emails. He's the freaking Undertaker, right? Turns the lights off when they're up, he's there, right? They just somebody knocked the door and said, there's a guest here to see you. I open up that door, and Undertaker takes up almost all the entire frame. And he and I were reminiscing, and I remember, something so vividly he said, that night in Pittsburgh will outlive us both. Like, what we did that night will live on in the minds of fans long after both you and I are gone. And you're pointing, that's heavy, right? He reminded me about those twist ties. I'd completely forgotten them. And he reminded me of the physical state that he was in at the start of that match. Like, I get a lot of credit for how I left the match, the physical state I was in. Anyone remember The Undertaker's physical state when he entered the ring? Broken foot, right? Ankle, foot. To the point where when I go through that cell, watch as he's thinking about it. First of all, he realizes I'm in a tough situation. He's hanging, he drops several feet, and he's hobbling noticeably, And then there's Terry Funk, right? I said I didn't know what words were said. That third life moment was at my Hall of Fame induction. I mean, they had so much star power there that night. They had Arnold Schwarzenegger inducting Bruno Sammartino. They had Stephanie McMahon inducting Trish Stratus, and Maria Menounos, TV star in the U.S., inducting Bob Backlund. And so they said to me, basically, you can have anyone you want induct you. And I said, I'll take Terry Funk, and that's Funk with an N. So where are we on the F-bomb scale? 0, right? And Terry gave this great speech, funny, poignant, brief, but most importantly, like, he shed light on the words were exchanged between him and The Undertaker, and I'm standing like no farther away from him than I am from you guys now, behind that curtain, and I'm in what is arguably the most famous arena in the world. And Terry says, he walks in and The Undertaker just looks at him and says, "See if he's alive." And when I mentioned that Terry awkwardly touched my face, he was taking my pulse. And when he turned around, he said to The Undertaker, "He's still breathing." At which point The Undertaker chokeslammed Terry Funk out of his shoes. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just my story. Honestly, I was like, this isn't just my story. I thought before, I don't have to talk about it. It's my story. I can share it if I want to. I don't want to share it. I realized this isn't just a story about me. It's not even just a story about me and Taker. It's a story of 3 men, One man who entered the most dangerous match ever devised with a broken foot, who then chokeslammed a second human being out of his shoes to buy time for a third human being previously thought to be deceased. So that he might regain consciousness to continue what people would call a fake pro wrestling match. And thank you. So, armed with those 3 life moments, I really started looking at that match in a completely different way and understanding that it's allowed me to be seen, at a certain echelon of people who held titles for years and carried companies on their backs. And I'm really fortunate to be seen in that group of people, largely because I was able to create a couple of moments along the way that have been indelibly stamped in people's minds.